There's an old saying that the Greeks sought after wisdom and the Jews sought after a sign. Today in the church, we see that we are seeking both wisdom and a sign. We're not looking for any unfolding of new truth. And because we're not preparing people that are living for a visitation of truth to prepare them for translation, we're casting a dark cloud upon the end time events that are soon to unfold upon the living. Welcome back to It Is Also Written Ministry. Today's topic is To Whom is God Speaking? Part 8. This message today is dealing with to whom are the keys of the kingdom given to, and how did they transfer from one truth to another truth, and from one movement to another movement. And in reference to the kingdom and the keys, is it true that the Catholic Church now holds the keys to the kingdom? Is this so, or is there another movement that possesses the keys today? Well, in today's message, we're going to take a look at exactly how God dispenses the keys from one movement to another and from one truth to another. Now, getting into our topic, we'll look at the truths decreed on earth is the decree in heaven. Reading from Matthew chapter 16, verses 13 and 14, when Jesus came into the coast of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, saying, Whom do men say that the Son of Man am? And they said, Some say that thou art John the Baptist, some say Elijah, and others Jeremiah, or one of the prophets. Here Jesus asked a vital question, Who do men think I am? The answer given him reveals the people's ignorance, for it seems that they should have known that Christ could not have been John the Baptist. They surely should have known that John had baptized him at the beginning of his ministry. Moreover, Jesus was preaching even before John was beheaded. So Matthew 16, verses 15 and 16, he saith unto them, But whom say ye that I am? And Simon Peter answered and said, Thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God. The disciples themselves seem to have been uncertain as to whom Jesus was. Peter alone, without a moment's hesitation, replied, Thou art the Son of the living God. Matthew 16:17, And Jesus answered and said unto him, Blessed art thou, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood hath not revealed it unto thee, but my Father which is in heaven. So we see Peter received the blessing because he was the one to whom the Father had revealed his Son, because he had been impressed by the Spirit of the sacred truth, and because he freely voiced the truth, that truth. Which truth is that? Well, having been endowed with the gift to his credit, Peter was told. Now in Matthew 16, verse 18, Jesus says, I say also unto thee, that thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. Now notice the words thou and this comprehend two objects, Peter and the truth he uttered. The name Peter in Greek means stone. And so what Jesus was actually saying was not to name the man, but rather to tell him that he was selected to be one of the stones in the spiritual structure, the church. But on this rock, not on a stone, I will build my church. Jesus declared on which rock? Obviously on the solid rock of truth. The truth which Peter uttered, the truth that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. Then Jesus made known that the gate of hell could not prevail against the truth, and the gate could not keep in hell, that is, in the grave, even the dead in Christ, that they too are to be a part of the ever-living church, the church that stands on the solid rock of truth. In Matthew chapter 16, verse 19, I read in your hearing, And I will give unto thee the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatsoever thou shalt bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatsoever thou shalt loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. Now notice, Jesus here declares that Peter is become the figure, or if you will, the type of all those who declare divinely revealed truths. To them, as to Peter, are given the keys of the kingdom, that is, the promulgators of inspired truth are authorized to bind and to loose by the power of the truth. That which they bind on earth is so recognized in heaven. For example, Elijah bound that there should be a famine for 3.5 years. So it was. Said he unto Ahab, There shall not be dew nor rain these years, but according to my word. 1 Kings 17:1. Again, I read Matthew chapter 16, verse 20. Then charged he his disciples that they should tell no man that he was Jesus the Christ. Now, since the people knew not that Jesus was the Son of the living God, Jesus realized that to flatly tell them so would only make them the more prejudiced. He therefore charged the apostles to do the same as that which we today are charged to do. And that is not to say flatly, we have all the truth, the message of the 11th hour. Instead, we are to teach the divinely revealed Bible truths, thus giving our hearers the opportunity to draw their own conclusions and to make up their own minds. And if they are honest searchers for truth, the Father himself will reveal in their hearts that this is the 11th hour message. We must not therefore bluntly speak forth all the important truths of God. We must use good judgment and tact. We must sow the seed in well-prepared soil if we expect God's blessing, if we expect his rain and sunshine to cause it to spring forth and to bear fruit. If the seed is not sown deep enough, the plant will wither away with the rising of the sun. And if we merely just drop the seed on the ground, on the topsoil, then the birds will pick it up. In Matthew 16:21-23, from that time forth began Jesus to show unto his disciples how that he must go unto Jerusalem and suffer many things of the elders and the chief priests and the scribes, and be killed, and be raised again on the third day. Now notice, then Peter took him and began to rebuke him, saying, Be it far from thee, Lord, this shall not be unto thee. But he turned and said unto Peter, Get thee behind me, Satan, thou art an offense unto me. For thou savorest not the things that be of God, but those that be of men. Now here is magnified the aforesaid truth. Peter's binding or loosing on earth was acceptable in heaven only when done by the means of divinely revealed truth. When speaking from his own impulse and sentiments, Peter was sharply rebuked and told plainly that his suggestions were not the truth, but were prompted by Satan. It is therefore plain that the followers of Christ may bind or loose only with the keys of truth. They are to realize that truth alone swings open the gates of heaven. Finally, if we have heaven's truths for the 11th hour, our hour, as Peter had it in his day, his hour, we then have the keys of heaven and can with it bind or loose. Truth's decisions on earth are the decisions in heaven. Again, I read in Matthew 16:24, Then said Jesus unto his disciples, If any man will come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. This verse implies that Peter's concern was more for his own life than for the life of Jesus. For Peter knew that if Jesus were slain, then his own life would be in jeopardy. Hence, Peter was told that if any man would follow Jesus, he too would voluntarily consent to carrying his own cross if truth so decrees. The apostles, we are told, did this very thing and were faithful unto death. Again, reading in Matthew 16, verses 25-27, For whosoever will save his life shall lose it, and whosoever will lose his life for my sake and the gospel shall find it. For what is it profit a man if he gains the whole world and loses his own soul? And what shall a man give in exchange for his soul? For the Son of Man shall come in the glory of his Father and with his angels, and then he shall reward every man according to his works. Now the followers of Christ are here told not to shun truth's decree, though they be required to surrender their own life, for thus losing their lives, they will be actually saving them for eternity. They will rise in the resurrection of the just, but from them to forsake truth in order to appease the enemies of truth and thus save their temporal lives would eventually result in their dying the death from which there is no resurrection. Now, it should be of interest to us to know whether the Apostle Peter was the first to be given the keys of heaven or whether others had the keys before him. And since present truth committed to an individual is the keys of heaven, and since the teaching of it binds and looses things on earth and is so sanctioned in heaven, then others must have had the keys before they were passed on to Peter, for the earth, the church, and the heaven revealed truths existed before Peter's time. Take, for example, Noah. He declared that there was to be a flood and that everything outside of the ark which he was building would perish and that everything that entered into it would live. Then the fact that heaven sent the flood immediately after Noah preached of it is proof in itself that that which Noah bound on earth was bound in heaven also. Peter, you see, was not the first to be given the keys of heaven. Now after Noah, we shall see that the keys were passed on to Abraham, since that which was to be bound or loosed on earth had to be bound or loosed in heaven. And the three messengers from heaven consulted Abraham concerning the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. It was then covenanted that if there was 10 righteous persons in the city where Lot lived, they should not destroy it. And so it was. Logically, after Abraham, the keys should have been passed on to Isaac. Isaac ruled that Jacob should receive the promised blessing, even though by birthright they were to be Esau's. And in spite of the fact that Jacob obtained the promised blessing by a fraud, heaven still sanctioned that which Isaac bound on earth. Jacob became the progenitor of Christ. Thus it is that down through the line of Jacob came the Lord, and thus it is that Jacob's descendants inherited the promised land. Having in possession the keys of the kingdom of heaven, Jacob, at the closing hours of his life, decreed that Manasseh's birthright should be given to Ephraim. To this Joseph protested the endeavoring to persuade his father and to put his right hand on Manasseh's head, Genesis 48:17 through 19. But what Jacob bound on earth was bound in heaven. For years later, after the death of Solomon, the tribe of Ephraim, not Manasseh, ruled the kingdom of Israel, and we see then that what Jacob bound on earth was also bound in heaven. Contemporaneously with Jacob, Joseph, by interpretation of Pharaoh's dream, bound that there should be 7 years of plenty and 7 years of famine. Thus it was that Joseph's decree was carried out, bound by heaven. And Moses said, if these men die the common death of all men, or if they be visited after the visitation of all men, then the Lord hath not sent me. But if the Lord make a new thing, and the earth open her mouth and swallow them up, with all that appertain unto them, and they go down quick into the pit, then ye shall understand that these men have provoked the Lord. Numbers 16:29 and 30. So Moses' decree was bound in heaven, for the earth opened up her mouth and swallowed them up, and the houses and all the men that appertain unto Korah and all their goods. Numbers 16:32. The keys of the kingdom, you see, passed along from one generation to another, from the patriarchs to the prophets to the apostles and on down to our day. For instance, several years ago, the Seventh-day Adventist denomination declared that the General Conference was no longer heaven's highest authority on earth. And thus it was that when the time arrived for the additional message, the fourth angel, which gives power and force to the third angel's message, to be proclaimed to the church, it came, not through the General Conference, but through the laity. This is proof positive that the keys with which Peter was invested and all the others are at work today. So plainly then, the keys of the kingdom of heaven are in the hands of those who have the truth for the day. Consequently, just as plain as heaven can make it, the truth stands out that the keys of the kingdom of heaven today are passing from the hands of the General Conference into those truth seekers, those that will make up the 144,000. As verily as they passed from the Sanhedrin to Peter in the days of Christ's first advent, so it is that truth decree on earth today is the decree in heaven. So understand, when God reveals something to a man which he himself cannot find in the Bible, term for such revelation is inspiration. Hence, Jesus pronounces that Peter was inspired, and the subject of Peter's revelation was the central theme of man's salvation, Jesus. The essential truth that had to be proclaimed in Peter's time was that Jesus Christ was the Son of God. Consequently, Peter had a message directly from the Father, of which he was a debtor to every living soul under heaven, and by which every man was to be judged either for salvation or condemnation. Therefore, the keys which Christ gave to Peter is the commission of the gospel. And as long as Peter was carrying this commission, he and those who joined to proclaim the message with him had the keys of the kingdom by which they could bind or loose on earth and be sanctioned in heaven. Thus it is evidence that a message from heaven proclaimed by God's chosen servant is all powerful, and by it man's destination concerning his salvation is decided. Plainly, then, we see that the church is not the key. Neither can a man or a set of men have the power to loose or bind with heaven's approval, except they do so by a message directly from God. Moreover, it will be noticed that different periods in the history of the church have each been marked by the development of some special truth adapted to the necessities of God's people at that time. Hence, our attention is called back to the beginning of time. It is because Noah, like Peter, had a message, keys for the necessity of God's people in his time, that was able to loose or bind, and the evidence of this, God sent the flood against which the gates of hell were not able to prevail. Likewise, Abraham had the keys, and thus God said to him, I will bless them that bless thee, and curse them that curseth thee, and in thee shall all the families of the earth be blessed. True, the ceremonial system was committed by Moses to God's ancient people, but later, when they refused to accept God's message, which was especially adapted to the necessities of his people in the closing of the typical ceremonial system, Christ took the keys from the Jewish leaders and gave them to the founders of the Christian church. Now, notwithstanding the example which God made of the Jewish leaders and the successors of the apostles and the successors to Moses, by adopting worldly customs and rejecting Luther's message, they also portrayed their sacred trust. Hence, the keys of the kingdom of heaven were taken away from the early Christian church, the Catholic later, and committed to the Lutherans, and thus down through the Reformation to the preaching of William Miller. When the Protestant churches at that time rejected Miller's message, they too unwittingly refused to be any longer the stewards of the sacred keys. Thus Miller and his associates possessed them until God's next message in 1844, when the keys passed from the Millerite movement to the Seventh-day Adventist denomination. It is obvious then that the SDA denomination was to have the keys during the period of the judgment of the dead, or for the time prior to the loud cry of the third angel's message, the judgment of the living, which we see now the keys being passed to those that are soon to be sealed, the 144,000 who are now embracing the final Elijah message that sanctifies and sets these vessels apart, that are called servants, who have the heaven-sent message and the keys to the kingdom. These are those that follow the Lamb wheresoever he goeth, and they carry forth the final message to the end of the world.